The best teaching tales are hearing those stories in the safety of the storyteller's lap. It's the traditional use of the cautionary tale. Beetleheim talks about it in a very famous book called The Uses of Enchantment, that in the safety of the storyteller's lap, a child can venture into the deep dark woods and meet the big bad wolf without fear or danger, because they are then brought back to the lab in a safe journey that is a vicarious experience that allows that child to see the consequences of a decision without having to have made that poor decision. Does this make sense? Mm-hmm. This is one of the powers of storytelling as a method of education for ethics educators, for parents, for anyone who wants to use stories as a tool for change. And today's theme is change, so I'm going to kind of come circling around to that. So because storytelling is a vicarious experience, it happens in the imaginal realm, not this actual realm. We can go places that we've never been. We can see things that we have never seen. We can learn what happens next in practice. So just think about it, and just as an introductory way of looking at this art form, it's fun. Did you like hearing the story this morning? Mm-hmm. You didn't hear it? I'll have to tell another story. Oh, well, good. Well, I'll tell another story. I told a story this morning in my retreat. So it's fun. People say, I enjoyed myself when you told. So that's great. You must have a very interesting self. Because storytelling is a co-created activity between the teller and the listener. And you do most of the work. I'll use my face, my body, my gestures, but most of the story takes place behind your eyes. So it is an ancient relational art form. And in the storytelling community, we call it co-creative. In other words, everybody is bringing something to the magical moment, and we're united by the tale. So the first step in storytelling education is to pick good stories. Oh, yeah. You know, make sure that the stories that you are carrying, if you're going to be a tale bearer, are ones that have value. Now, why would they have value? They may be a good vessel to carry your message. They may be an experience that lightens the burdens of others, which is another sacred use of story, that it can lighten the heart. It could be that the stories are a teaching method. It's the oldest teaching technology. It's an information transmission method that works because humans have been teaching about life through stories since the beginnings of communication. There isn't a single culture on our planet that doesn't have stories embedded in the identity of the culture. Cultures make the folklore, and there's a difference between a piece of fiction and a folk tale. Today we're going to look at folk tales. A piece of fiction is attributed to a single author. We know who wrote Harry Potter, right? J.K. Rowling. She had a great imagination. Well, those plots are not traditional plots. They're imaginative. And so if you go to the library, her books will be in fiction. If you want to go find, hi there, if you want to go find a Mula Nasruddin story from the Middle East, there are countless books of stories, different versions of these Sufi stories, and they're going to be in the non-fiction section of the library with the other folktales and fairy tales and fables, because folktales and fairy tales and fables don't have a single author, so they can't be over in fiction. They are a reflection of the culture from which they come, so they are part of social studies. Does this make sense? And even though it's a fairy tale, it's over there in nonfiction, children always ask me, because I spend a lot of my time telling stories in schools, and children say, well, is that story true, that is ours? And I've just told them a fairy tale from Afghanistan. Right? And I'll say, yes, absolutely. Not because it happened, but because there's a little bit of truth in it. And a good archaeologist or social scientist who's studying culture will dig down into that plot to see what does this tale reveal about the culture from which it comes. If it's a traditional tale, it's been honed by the tongues of tellers over time, and it's passed down and almost licked into shape until finally it is in a form that's memorable. And if it gets to the point where it's memorable, once you hear it, you can leave with it. You know it by heart. And because you know it by heart, you can pass it on, and that's the structure. And the reason why it is so powerful a form is because it is fun and engaging. And a person who hears a story is engaged in their imagination. If the story has images that are nourishing or ideas that are useful, then the listener may be benefited by having heard the story. And the story, interestingly, the speaker who just spoke about seeds, I talk about it all the time in that same way. A story is like a seed planted in the heart of the listener. And it can grow and blossom over time. Because sometimes a story that is heard at one point in life means something different to the listener 30 years later. You might even identify 30 years later with different characters in that story. Things might have happened to you to enrich your own understanding of life so that that story suddenly has more meaning. And I most humbly say that I have been telling stories since I was in my 20s, and I just turned 65. And I'm embarrassed sometimes, and I chuckle at myself at the stories I told when I was 20. What did I know about life at 20? I was talking about love and life and loss, and what did I know? I was 20 years old. At 65, I'm old for a ballerina, but young for a storyteller. So I still have a ways to go in my understanding of the human condition and my understanding of this artistic form that I find delicious and rich and ever new. I can tell the same story a gazillion times. It's always new because, as Heraclitus says, you can never stop in the same river twice. Every time you put your foot in there, there's a new bit of water going by. So it is a new river. It's a new place. It's a new group. It's a new reason. It's a new justification for that story to be kept alive. So it becomes new again. And I delight in telling the same stories because I've chosen well. I'm a talebearer. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of stories. I don't carry all of them. I carry the ones that I care about, that I think are useful tools for information to pass on. For whatever reason they're useful to me, they might even be useful differently to the listener. I can't take responsibility for how useful they are because people hear them differently. They hear them from where they are in time. They hear them from their own point of joy or sorrow. You listen. I'm just going to do it. Yes, this is me talking about it. And behind the scenes, the conversations. Would you want to discuss the neuroscience or I don't know. Is this the time to do it? So behind the scenes, I'm going to let that come in here because you raise your hand as an educator. Okay, I have a couple of very useful things, not a whole lot, but a couple of very useful points I think that educators need to know about how the human mind works. Because whether you're teaching math or you're teaching humanities, or you're teaching spirituality, or religious ethics, if you want someone to remember something, you need to know how the mind works. Otherwise, every experience just washes over and nothing sticks. Well, human beings parallel process. They listen for information. They listen with emotion. They listen with memory. So if you're listening for, and you're also listening for imagination, so those would be the four threads. Information, imagination, let's give imagination, memory and emotion, those four. Would you agree? That's pretty logical. Well, translating that into what's happening while you're telling the stories to your children there, you've got a great story that really embodies the religious idea, that encourages faith, and here, today's the day you're going to tell it, right? And it's all about a dog, right? And everybody is listening to the story, all the children, eager-eyed. And they're listening for the information, and they're imagining it. And then their memories might be provoked, dogs they've known. And then emotion will come forward. I was sitting at a conference one time, for lawyers, because I train lawyers in the use of storytelling in the courtroom. And my friend Elizabeth Ellis was also teaching at that conference, and she was telling a very funny story about her mother. And people were laughing so hard because she's a comedian as well as a storyteller. The man next to me was holding his belly and doubled over with laughter, and I was weeping. Tears were coming down, but not because I was laughing, but because I was crying. It was a story about her mother. I heard information about her mother, and then I used my imagination, and I was picturing her mother and the situations, and all of a sudden I saw my mother. And I was remembering all the times in my life when my mother and I had experiences just like that. My mother had died 3 weeks earlier, and I was emotionally devastated by her story, and I started to cry. Imagination was a very powerful part of that. Memory was a part of that. Emotion was a part of that. Information, we all heard the same information. It's a story about a mother. But when I was imagining, and when I was remembering, and when I was emoting, I had a different world. If you tell a story about a dog, and somebody just got a new puppy, so there they had this story about the dog, information about dogs, and imagining dogs, wonderful dogs, and Mary, I just got the dog, and what if the dog died? So the child, so just with all humility, knowing that people parallel process. At any given time, one of those four things could spike, right? And for me, the spike was emotion, okay? But it could be, that somebody's they're very interested in the information, or their imaginations are on fire, or suddenly they're remembering a gazillion things to do about that topic. So it could be anything. So parallel processing means your mind is doing a couple of different things all at the same time. That's what computers do. They call it parallel processing. Okay? It can do more than one thing. But at any given time, different things are coming up. So you have to choose well, and you have to be very, very aware of your listeners and how they're responding to you. And I take care of my listeners because I'm looking at faces. If I see a little girl or a little boy in their eyes, and I say, okay, what's going on here? I'm imagining what's going on behind their eyes. How is this playing? What is this doing? Is it doing what I think it's going to do? The teller needs to be very sensitive to what's happening in the room because it's an improvisatory experience. The other thing that's really neat about storytelling for educators to know is that we have two different memories. We have a memory system that is very ancient. It's actually physically located in the back of our brain. It's called the limbic system. I'm sure you've heard of the reptilian mind. In the last 10 years, we have learned more about the neuroscience of learning than has ever been on the planet. I mean, they have ways to take a look at what parts of the brain light up when you see this or think about that. So we know a lot about how things fire and how things are taken in. So I was very excited as a storyteller to learn this little piece of information, which I think is useful for educators who have the intention of transmitting information that's remembered. Would you agree that you are educators interested in transmitting information that's remembered? Okay. On the same page. The ones that are doing all those tests for kids about math and social studies, they have the same agenda. You just have different content, but everybody's interested in the same thing. How do you have a memorable education when kids are so distracted that they don't know? So we have two different kinds of memories. This limbic system back here is very ancient. Another word for it is spatial memory. Spatial memory. It's a very simple memory. It allows you to remember how to get home. It's evolutionarily useful. If you go to a new place and you navigate the first time, how do you get to the worship hall? Okay, and then you go have some lunch. Did anybody have any trouble finding this place again? No, because you were here before. So spatial memory allows you to recall where you've been in time and space. People who are spatially challenged like that get lost walking down the hall. Okay? They can't, see where they are. And, okay, being able to know where you are in time and space and being able to navigate your way back is useful. In order to do that, you have to be able to create a sequence of events that you can recall or recount, okay? And it's all done this physically and viscerally, okay? So that's where everything that's ever happened to you, your lived experience, is stored in spatial memory. Even though you don't remember every single thing that's ever happened to you all the time, because if you had all of that in your foreground, you'd be confused, right? So there's such a thing as merciful memory. So everything that's ever happened to you is, in fact, in spatial memory, because that's where your lived experience is stored, but you're not always thinking about it. Unless it was a traumatic experience, it makes it more of a spike. Most things recede, which is probably why we have more than one child. So we have all of this experience, and it's all back there. Okay, that's where anything that has a narrative feel is kept. So what happened to you yesterday is in spatial memory, because it unfolds like a story. Taxon memory is in the cognitive forward centers, the neocortex. It's in the front, it's in the more evolved part of the brain. And it's where we store the disconnected facts that have nothing to do with one another. Like if you memorize the times tables or the capitals of all the states, or disconnected facts that you have to recall that are not in a narrative form but are in a list, they're stored, if they don't walk, talk, and quack like a story, then they're stored in taxon memory, T-A-X-O-N. Now, I think that the spatial memory is a very powerful memory because details of every sort are back there, incredibly embedded in our memory. So, why is this important? Because all narrative, as a storyteller, I'm excited about this, is stored in spatial memory. So movies you've seen, books you've read, stories you've heard, they all walk, talk, and quack in a kind of a flow of events, just like life happens, a story happens. It's all stored in spatial memory, right? And it's easy to remember things that are stored in spatial memory. Trust me, Kimberly, what did you have for breakfast?
Oatmeal.
Oatmeal. Did you have it at home?
Yes.
You did. And did you have it in a particular room in your house?
Sort of my kitchen area.
Okay, your kitchen neat area. And you put the cereal in something to eat it? Was it in a bowl?
Oh, it wasn't a bowl.
Okay, what color was the bowl?
Blue.
It was a blue bowl. Okay, you know that. You do that. Okay, 3 weeks from now, Kimberly, you will not remember that it was a blue bowl in your kitchen neat area. But right now you remember it because it happened to you. It's in spatial memory and it hasn't mercifully receded far into the distance. Okay? Unless something dramatically happened, the bowl suddenly talked to you. It wouldn't really come forward again. It would just sort of just...
But all my bowls are blue.
Okay, so your whole kitchen is now in your imagination right now.
Yes.
All of your crockery is in your imagination, and your pot collection is right there. And if you open the drawers, you know exactly where to find that serving spoon, right?
Yes.
Yes, right. You see, we have our lived experiences stored in which memory? Spatial memory. Now, why do I care? I care about this because I'm a storyteller educator. And the little teeny fact factoid that I learned about the difference between these two memory systems makes all the difference in the world. When you are nervous, angry, fearful, agitated, overly resentful, any of those strong and powerful emotions, it is difficult to access taxon memory. But you can access spatial memory. So in a time of extreme danger, your mind is not going to go, something's coming at you, oh, I see, it's at an angle, 45-degree angle, and, all your academic, that goes out the window. You knee-jerk respond, okay? And the information is coming from your lived experience or any stories that you've ever heard from spatial memory. If that's the case, then when somebody is in danger, when somebody is afraid, when someone really needs to be sharp, if the information to keep them safe and healthy and sustained is entirely a list that they have to memorize and it's up in taxon memory, is going to do them any good? No. In a time of danger, they can't even remember what to do. But translate that to tests. The child is sitting there at the desk and they're thinking, my teacher's going to get fired if I don't do a good job, or my whole school district's going to get a bad report in the newspaper. That's what their principal said. And I have to do very well. I'm so nervous, I can't even remember anything I'm supposed to write about. I can't even pay attention to the instructions and I can't remember what they said, because I'm not taking in information anymore that I can draw from spatial memory. It's not part of my lived experience. It's in taxon memory and I have no access to it. That's why people who are in medical professions need to have hands-on lived experiences. They can't just learn from a textbook. Because in a time of danger, you need to have that information right there. That's why when you're a human being alive, you have to have a lot of experience that's stored in spatial memory to know how to deal with new situations. In the most practical way, I work with young lawyers who come right out of law school and they think because they list the facts of the case, the jury's going to listen to the facts, assemble it into a narrative. 3 months later, they're going to be in the jury room and they will rule favorably for that client, whose life might be on the line, or whose child might be taken away from them for some ridiculous racist or classist issue. And it's that public defender, that's who I work with, it's their job to make sure that their client has justice. And telling a story well for those people is life-changing for the person that they are serving. It's not just, well, this child learned a better attitude towards the fourth commandment. This is really, in some states it can mean life or death because there's the death penalty. So I've worked in situations where some of these young public defenders are defending people who are on death row. So since I don't believe in the death penalty, I feel responsible to make sure that these young kids have the best tools at hand to tell the story rather than a list of facts, because the jury is not going to remember the facts if you just give them a list. However, if you take the fact and you put it inside of a narrative, guess where the narrative is stored? Spatial memory. In a time of danger, excitement, fear, anger, anxiety, you can remember the story and tuck nicely inside of the story, because the story is one of the most powerful and safe containers for information, is that little piece of information. So the piece of information is there in the story, saved in spatial memory to be used at the time of danger. That's why teaching tales in a spiritual tradition actually work. So that when a person is faced with an ethics decision, maybe there's no list of rules that helps, but maybe there's a story that they've heard that has the information to nurture their decision embedded right in it. And that's where the person will go for the guidance into their own spatial memory, where there are stories stored. It could be a story that they heard about what happened to somebody else when they did this, that, and the other thing. It could be a story that they remember about their own life. That, oh, I've learned from this and I'm not going to make that mistake again. But sometimes we don't want everybody to have to make mistakes to learn. That's why we tell stories. They could be stories about lived experience. This happened to me, and therefore learn from it. It could be stories about great leaders, where you hear, the parables about this. Every spiritual tradition has tales about great spiritual leaders because they're model heroes or sheroes. Or characters in folklore that create a model of behavior that you can draw upon. And interestingly, children know, everybody knows, once you say once upon a time, we know that we're not in this reality, that we're willing to leap into the unknown, into some other reality, and we know that it's a movie, we know that it's a book, we know that it's a story. There's a difference between this kind of narrative material that is stored in spatial memory and our actual experience, which is also stored in spatial memory, along with the last great movie you saw is that little book. They're both in spatial memory. And you know the difference between your kitchen and some kitchen in a movie, correct? Right. The only time that area gets fuzzy, I've seen this happen, is when someone's close to death. I watched it happen to my father. He was very clear about this. He sat up and said, in hospice, I remember it well. I was in that bar and I said, play it again, Sam. I said, Dad, that wasn't you. That was Humphrey Bogart that said it. In Casablanca. Yes, that's where we were. And I said, play it again, Sam. And it was this funny little moment where I realized that the veil between all the movies and books and television shows he had ever seen and his actual lived experience had blended. And he was in Casablanca. And, it happens in dementia. My mother-in-law is very clear about it, that she was there when Martin Luther King gave his speech. She was there. And she was there when that sailor, she said there's a famous picture of it, this is a little, now she's not so verbal, but where the sailor leaned the young girl over and kissed her because the war was over. She said, I saw that happen. I have seen it happen too, but it's in a photograph. I'm sure that my mother-in-law watched as the man took the first step on the moon, because she had to have been there too. Anything that was in media was suddenly part of her lived experience. The blur between the two, but for the most part, trust that when you're telling a story, the listener will sift that which is kind of fantasy-oriented from that which is reality-based. That's kind of our natural way. And it's all stored in spatial memory, which is easier to access in times of danger and stress. And it's those times of spiritual despair or everyday life confusion that you need access to information that you can't get from your taxon memory because you just don't have access to it. The doors are closed when those emotions are flaring. So if you want somebody to remember something, couch it, encase it, place it nicely inside of a story. And you might be surprised. It's easier to remember a story than a list of disconnected facts. That's the most useful thing I have to say to you, I think, as educators. And so now I'd like to tell you a story about faith. Imagination is very powerful, and worry is one of the biggest issues I seem to be noticing. Have you noticed how worried everybody seems? The biggest stress is that everybody's worried. They're just worried. I don't know what they're worried about. But most of it is, some of it, well, I don't know. Just before I tell you the story, I just need to, worry. What are people worried about in your world, in your community, in your congregation? What are they worrying about?
Job loss.
Job loss. Money.
Loss. Children, illness.
Illness loss.
Economy, the environment, I mean,
Issues.
for a Unitarian, you worry about everything.
It's our job.
It's your job to worry. Okay. So, okay, if you're a Unitarian, it's your job to worry. Okay, so let me just redefine the word worry as negative imagination. Will you go with me on that?
Yeah.
It's negative imagination because you don't know the future. If you knew the future, my grandmother used to say, if you were meant to see around the corner, you would have been born with long necks. You can't know the future. So it's a 50-50 chance it's going to be good or bad. I don't know if it's good. I don't know if it's bad. That's why I told that story. Because you always don't know. You can't possibly know when something that seems like a disaster is going to turn to be a blessing to you. And the only difference between somebody who is always worrying and someone who has found some peace with ambiguity is faith. There was once a king who worried. He was a king long ago in Afghanistan, the Shah Abbas. Every day he worried, his brow was furrowed. He worried that his treasury would be diminished. He worried that his ministers would be disloyal. He worried that his soldiers would lose in battle. He was plagued with worry. One day he stood at his palace window looking out at the scene in the distance before him. A village, marketplace, with people scurrying here and there, and he wondered, do those people worry? Oh, if I could wander amongst them and listen to their conversations, I could learn how common people live. And that's when the idea came to him. He called for his royal tailor and asked that the crudest robe be made out of sackcloth. And it was secretly brought to his chamber. And when all were gone, he took that robe and examined it. It was enough to cover all. And in the morning, he dressed himself in that suit of sackcloth, and he covered his head with a hood. And he rubbed ashes on his face. Even the servants didn't recognize him as he made his way out of the palace and traveled amongst the people in the market, listening here and there and everywhere. And by the end of the day, he had passed so much. But the one thing that he was drawn to before he returned home was the sound that was coming from a rude little cottage along a pathway. It was a joyful song. He hadn't heard anything like it all day, and he was drawn to the sound. And when he looked in the window, he saw an old man. The old man had nothing in that house but a crude table that had one broken leg, and the man was singing a song as he was cutting a loaf of bread. And the king was so curious that he banged on the door. And when the old man inside opened the door and saw the beggar before him, he said, "Oh, come in, I am about to have some bread. I have so little, but what I have I will share with you. It's been a good day. Come in. And the king entered this crude, rude place. There was nothing there to eat except this loaf of bread on the table. And as he ate, the man who had cut the bread and who had sang the song said, "Today was the best day I've had in such a long time. I'm a cobbler. I make shoes. And today I repaired enough shoes. Nobody wants to buy any shoes anymore. But repairing, now there's a good occupation there. I earned enough to buy myself a loaf of bread. It's been a good day." And the king, disguised as a beggar, said, "Every day you earn enough to buy your loaf of bread?" "Ah, yes, yesterday was not so good, but today was a better day." And the king said, I don't understand. You seem so happy. aren't you worried that maybe you won't be able to buy a loaf of bread? And he said, I have a song. I sing it to myself every day. Day by day, I have faith, all will be well. It's a little song, but it gives me hope. The king thought, this man has faith, and that's why he doesn't worry. Well, I wonder if his faith would be strong in times of adversity. We'll see. And the next day, when the cobbler went to the market to fix shoes, there was a sign that said, by royal decree, it is now illegal to fix shoes. Everyone who has broken shoes must buy new ones. Oh, and he saw the sign. He said, but times are difficult. Nobody has money for new shoes. I have no job. What shall I do? And as his thoughts darkened, that song came to him. Ah, day by day, I have faith, all will be well. Ah, and that's when he noticed the old woman. She was struggling by the well, trying to lift a bucket of water. Oh, he rushed to her side, and he helped her pick up the bucket, and he put the bucket on her cart. And the woman, for his struggle, gave him a coin. Well, it seems I've replaced my old occupation with a new one. I am now an official water carrier. And so he stayed there all day, helping people with their water. By the end of the day, he had enough coins to buy himself a loaf of bread and a chunk of cheese and some fruit besides. And that next night, when the king came to see him in hunger and despair, instead he heard the laughter and the joy, and he looked in the window, and there was the man cutting the cheese and the bread and singing a song. He banged on the door, and when the old man opened the door and he saw the beggar, he said, oh, come in, I have much more to share this evening. Come, I've got cheese, and I have fruit, and I have bread. I don't understand. You fix shoes. I saw the sign myself in the market. Ah, yes. For a moment I had some despair, but it seems that my loss of one occupation has opened the door to the next. Help yourself. I have faith, all will be well. I haven't tested him severely enough. The next day, when he arrived at the marketplace, the old man saw there was a sign by the well that said, it is henceforth illegal to help anyone with water. Well, perhaps things are not as good as I thought. I have faith day by day, all will be well. He saw the men walking into the forest with axes upon their shoulders. And he came to the group and said, do you need another woodcutter? I'm strong. Oh, yes, we always need another woodcutter. Join in. And so he spent the day. At the end of the day, he had cut enough wood. He had enough money now. He went to the market and he bought bread and cheese and fruit and a bottle of wine. And when the king came knocking on his door and the door was opened, he couldn't believe what he saw. I saw the sign. I saw the sign. Yes, it is a good sign. I have a new job. Sometimes one job is replaced with another. Now, have a glass of wine with me. I have faith. All will be well, and you see, things are working out quite well for me. King thought, I'm not clever enough to test this man's faith. The next day, while he was in the forest with the woodcutters, the group of woodcutters were surrounded by the king's guards. And it was announced, the king has requested that all woodcutters become guards at the palace. And they were herded away. And he found himself that day, dressed like a man, in a full palace uniform. And they gave him a great silver sword in a big scabbard about his waist. And he was made to stand there all day, guarding the palace. At the end of the day, he was tired from standing with that heavy sword. But the sun was going down, and he went to the captain of the guards and said, well, my day's work is done. Now, I need to have my money. And the captain of the guard said, guards at the palace are paid once a month. But I need food tonight. I see. And as he walked away, his hunger grew. And he thought, in a month's time, I'll have plenty of money, but in a month's time, I'll die of starvation. I'm required to serve the king. And he despaired for a moment when that thought rose up. Day by day, I have faith. All will be well. And the moment the thought came into his mind, that's when he went to the pawn shop. And he sold the silver sword for enough money to buy a month's worth of food. And then he used some of the money to buy a piece of carving wood. And when he got home, he carved a wooden sword that perfectly fit the scabbard. And then he set about to create a great feast. When the knock at the door came, he almost knew who it was. Ah, yes, my beggar friend. Come, we have a feast. We have a feast. And the beggar looked and said, I don't understand. I saw you today. You're a guard. Guards are paid once a month. How did you manage to buy so much food? And he said, oh, I was worried at first, but then, day by day, I have faith. All will be well. I sold the sword temporarily. At the end of the month when I'm paid, I'll take it back from the pawn shop and return it to its proper place. In the meantime, I'll be able to do a good job for the king, for I'll be alive to serve. And the beggar, disguised, said, I've got him now. He won't have so much faith when he languishes in the dungeon. The next day, as he stood in his soldier's garb with the great sword at his side, there was a great crowd that came. The captain of the guards was dragging a man who was howling, please let me go, let me go, my family is hungry, I stole the melon, I did, but my child has nothing to eat, let me go. The king, said the captain of the guards, throwing the thief at the foot of the old man, has commanded that you cut off this man's head. He has stolen a melon. I'm doomed, he thought for just a moment. But that's all. I have faith day by day, all will be well. The moment that thought entered his mind, he stood tall and he said, cut off this man's head. The crowd drew close. They were going to watch. Cut off this man's head. I have never killed a man in all my days. And then he raised his hands to the heavens and he said, if this man is guilty, give me the strength to do the king's command. But if this man is innocent, may my sword be turned to wood. The crowd began to cheer, a miracle, a miracle, a miracle. And the captain of the guards let the thief scurry away. And out of the crowd stepped the king, disguised as the beggar once again, who came forward to the old man and said, do you know who I am? And the old man said, yes, you're the beggar who comes to me every night with the furrowed brow. No, I am the king. And do you know who you are? I am whatever I need to be. No, said the king. You are now my chief advisor, because your faith, the bright light of it, will chase away the dark shadows of my fears and worry. And from that day on, they say, that humble old man became chief advisor to the king of Afghanistan.
Good one. I just read that.
That was great.
It's one of the 50 stories in Wisdom Tales. I brought a bunch of them, and they're on the table. It's a collection of 50 stories which all have rich cultural heritage and yet all talk about wisdom in different ways. The story that I told this morning is also in this one. The Wooden Sword. Close your eyes for just a moment. I'd like you to go back into that story and watch the movie. Picture the king, his palace, his crude sackcloth, the ashes on his face. Picture the old man. Picture his cottage. I'm sure you know what it looks like. Picture the bread and the cheese. And the wine. And travel through the story just a little bit, through his occupations. Picture him as a cobbler, then as a water carrier, then as a woodcutter, and then as a guard at the palace. And picture the crowd and the thief crying out, "Let me go. My children were hungry. I stole a melon." You open your eyes. Could you see that? Okay. The sequence of events is a simple sequence of events. I took a long time to kind of elaborate it because I was making a movie for you. And the more the storyteller says, the more the listener sees. So by painting, I could tell that story very short, or I could tell it very long. I also added dialogue, where the characters talk to one another. But there was nobody up here for me to talk to, but you're not looking at me talking to somebody. I'm talking as characters, but what were you seeing while I was talking?
The movie.
Yeah, and you were seeing the characters talk to one another. So trusting that this is the process, that what's happening as you're telling the story is that you're adding images to the imaginal space of the listener, is tremendous permission to have fun with detail and dialogue. And don't worry that anybody's looking at you. I know you were looking at me. You were looking at me like kids look at me. It's amazing. I know you're not even seeing me. You're seeing all the characters that I'm building for you through my narrative. And I speak slowly enough so that, even though that was improvised, most of it, there is set text in the book, but it's not word for word that I just told it to you. What I told you was the movie, that as I was seeing it, I was describing it, I have enough confidence in my ability to say one word after the next that the words will tumble forward and they'll be there because I've got a picture. And where is the picture? In my spatial memory. Now, since I've told that to you, I have now made an experience for myself. I can enter that imaginal space and I can literally walk through it because I know what it looks like now because I told it to you once. So every time I tell it, that imaginal space inside of me becomes richer and deeper and more colorful, so that the next time I tell it, I might add another detail. I might tell you about the rest of the way the king's bedroom looked. I could have, I didn't mention a lot of things that I was seeing. I left out a lot of detail that I could see because I figure you're making that detail for me. And so the storyteller is much more sparse than the writer. The writer can spend a whole page just describing a room. Storytellers don't. The storytelling art form is much more condensed, and a lot is left to the listener. And it's a fabulous way of being creative and still allowing the listener to be creative. give to you. Just give just enough, but not too much, right? But I know the movie, so I can tell it to you. The other thing I could do is I could memorize all the words in the book. But if I was nervous, excited, fearful, angry, some emotion, and I might suddenly find myself unable to remember what the words were. So even if I do have set text, I always have the safety net of the movie, because if I fall out of the set text, that memorized text, I can fall into the movie and just improvise with the words, because I have the movie. Instant storytelling is really what most people need to be able to do, to quickly look at a text and close your eyes, make a movie of it, and be able to tell it to somebody right away. That makes it an easy way to bring a story that's brand new, you just read it the night before. So here's what it looks like when I'm working on a story. I like to read stories. That's how I learned a lot of the stories, from folktale books, wisdom tales. The whole library is filled with books of stories from around the world. I read a book, find a story I really like, close the book, close my eyes. I watch the movie. When my children were small, I spent a lot of time being mom, the kids be crawling around. I'd always have a book in my diaper bag, and I'd be sitting, and then I'd be sitting on the couch, and I'd close my eyes, and I'd go through the process of visualizing the tale, and my son would always come over at that moment, as soon as my eyes are closed, and he'd tug out of my sleeve and say, Mom, what are you doing? And I would always say, I'm working. I'm working very hard right now. And he'd say, what are you doing? I'm watching a movie. Can I see the movie? Yes, you can see the movie. And I would then tell him the story, and that's how he could see the movie too. And that's kind of how the beginning stages go. It's kind of a chatting the story. Now, the faith that another word will come after the first one that you say, that's an act of faith, like planting a seed is an act of faith. Because sometimes people, they say that the biggest fear of is public speaking, because people are afraid they're going to talk themselves into a grammatical corner. They'll get up and they might know, if they try to memorize something, and what I'm telling you is don't try to memorize it, because it's not going to be stored where you can find it. Make sure that you have a movie, and then trust the movie to give you the words. Okay? So what I need you to do, just so that you don't have to listen to me say this, you can try it for yourself, I need you to get with a partner and sit next to your partner. Okay? Can you physically be next to a partner so that you have somebody to work with? And we're going to see how imaginal space translates itself into improvisational speech. So, we're going to play a game called Chain Sentence. And chain sentence, and you're going to need to be close enough so that you can hear each other. In chain sentence, basically, you're going to decide, kind of pretend that you are one storyteller. And the way that we're going to do this, let's see, somebody, what, can I see what's your name?
Oh, Marcy.
Marcy, what is your name?
Marcy.
Can everybody hear her? Okay. Marcy and I are going to pretend we're a couple. And Marcy, the game is called Chain Sentence, so we're going to link our words, and the way that it works is this. I'm going to say a word, then you're going to say a word, then I'm going to say a word, then you're going to say a word. You're going to listen very carefully, and the two of us are going to build the first sentence of a world-famous ghost story. Okay? And it's world-famous, it's won the Pulitzer Prize, so we can be very confident about this story. And the rest of the story is not going to be heard, but this very first sentence is going to be as long as we can possibly make it and remain grammatically correct. And what everybody else is going to listen for is if Marcy or I come to an edge. An edge looks like this. You come to the next thing that you're going to say. It's your turn to speak, and it looks like this. You don't know what to say. Okay. And there's two good reasons why you don't know what to say. 1, there are too many choices. 2, you don't know what to say. So in the case that you don't know what to say, that is an act of faith, that something will come next if you just wait. If you just wait, you might be surprised that something will come to mind. You might even be surprised at what pops into your mind. If there are too many things to choose from, just wait. And one of them will come forward more than the other, and that's the one you grab. Some people are frightened of edges. They only like to stay with everything they know. This is a game about edges, where you go to the edge of everything you know, and like a scientist or an artist who loves the unknown, you leap in. And with great faith, assume that a word will come and rise up out of somewhere and save you, and give you a word to say. So I say that improvisation is an act of faith, that something will come next. Okay? That's what I want on my gravestone. Something will come next. Okay, so it'll look like this, Marcy. We're going to make the first sentence of a very ethereal process. If
One,
night
you
travel
to
the
darkest,
forest
covered,
with
weeping,
willows
dying,
in
midair,
then
close,
your
mind,
and
imagine.
if you ever, what was that, find yourself in the darkest forest filled with weeping willows, then close your mind and imagine. Ooh, wow. It's good first beautiful sentence. The challenge is to see if you can even remember it. But there were some edges where it could have gone in a lot of different ways. So what we're really looking for is how you feel when you come to an edge. And this is an activity through which to see that. So with your partner, you're going to make the first sentence of an adventure story of the high seas, because the imagery might change if that was your mission. And then you're going to make the first sentence of a great spiritual teaching tale. Okay? 2 different sentences. Okay? And let's see what happens. And let's see if you can sort of...
I'm sorry, could you get those directions again?
The first one you're going to make with your partner is, the topic of it is an adventure story of the high seas, like a pirate story, sailor story. And the second one is a great and powerful spiritual teaching tale from around the world.
Okay, so we're doing it
2
twice.
different, you can make 2 different first sentences just to have an experience of seeing if the imagery changes when you're doing a pirate story as opposed to a spiritual teaching tale. Here we go. Okay, can I have your attention? I have a question for you. While you were doing this activity, did anybody come to what I was describing as an edge? Where, yeah. What did it feel like when what you wanted, the direction you were going, suddenly was kind of kiboshed by someone going in a different direction?
Yeah.
Did that happen to anybody?
Oh,
Where
yeah.
you were ready to go and something unexpected came your way? Yes.
We used, I think I used the word sun, and she didn't know if I meant S-O-N or S-U-N, and she said, well, where am I going with that? I'm like, pick whichever way you want. Because I didn't necessarily know where I was going with it.
So when you found yourself at an edge where you had to make a decision, and you were kind of confronted by the fact that it gave you pause, is the expression.
Right.
Right? If you waited, that was the advice. I said, just wait. Improvisation is an act of faith that something will come next. If you just waited, did something pop into your mind?
Yes.
It did. Okay. So this is a very concrete example of hope. Okay? In a very, miniaturized activity that's language-based and also is in, first of all, can you play this game if you're not listening? No. So there's a keen listening component to it. And you were each picturing different worlds, so your imagination is engaged. But where you might have been going with it is slightly different than what ended up coming to you. So you had to think on your feet, right? So these are the skills of the storyteller. If you're improvising, you have to be in the moment, think on your feet, stay close with the image at hand, and be a good listener. And if you're a storyteller, the one you're listening to is yourself. Great singers have to listen to their voice to see if they're singing in tune. Great storytellers of any level of conversational to, main stage have to listen to themselves, because if you're not listening to yourself, why should anybody listen to you? So being able to listen to yourself gives you the opportunity to notice that you've gone awry, make a pause, or see that your story, maybe you suddenly realize, uh-oh, I forgot something important. You can always fix that. You can say, oh, but what I didn't tell.
But you meant it.
Right? You can always fix it because you're improvising and you have the movie. It's in spatial memory. It's a world that you're describing. It's kind of like kids telling a TV show. They saw it, you've probably done this with a movie.
Right.
You can retell a whole movie. If you have 5 minutes, it takes 5 minutes to tell it. But I've seen kids who, oh, I missed the TV show, what happened? They've got 5 minutes, they're on their way to the lunchroom, and they tell the whole movie or the whole TV show in 5 minutes. If there was more time in the playground, I've seen kids that can't pass a history test will tell the whole thing because they're just replaying the movie in imaginal space, and it's stored nicely in spatial memory, and they will give all the details, and because it was done narratively, it's permanently embedded in an easy to find place. If teachers would teach through story, it would be easier to remember everything. And in this case, like the what kind of stories are we trying to remember? And in this case, let's use all of the little things we were exercising, one of which is good listening. The other was being able to think on your feet, which means to make new words for the pictures that are in your mind. And I'm going to do like a bedtime story thing. I'm going to tell you a very simple story, and I want you to just listen to it and without writing down anything, see if you can just remember as opposed to dismember what happened. Okay? This is a very simple plot. Take it in through your ears and remember it in spatial memory, because remember it as a movie. Now you could read it and do the same thing. You would close your eyes. So this is a very simple, but it's about 3,000 years old. A flock of birds were peacefully pecking seeds under a tree. Along came a hunter. The hunter had a great net. When the hunter saw the birds, he had only one thought. He took the net and he threw the net over the whole flock of birds. All at once, the birds began to flap their wings. Together, up, up, up the net rose. It came down on the tree, and as the net caught and snagged in the tree's branches, the birds flew out from under it to freedom. The hunter looked on in amazement. He scratched his head and said, as long as those birds cooperate, I'll never be able to capture them. Each one of those birds is small, and yet, together, they could lift a net. Okay, close your eyes. Watch that little plot roll. Can you picture the birds? Picture the hunter. It's got a net. Picture the net falling over the birds. Now picture how the birds actually managed to get the net up into the tree. And once the net was on the tree, imagine how those birds actually got out from under the net. And now do a real good close-up of that hunter and his confused face, musing over how each one of the birds is small, and yet they could lift that net. They worked together. Okay, open your eyes. Okay, how did the birds get out? Show me how the birds got out. How did they get out?
From the tree?
Yeah, they're under the net, the net's caught, how do they get out?
They flew down and then back up.
Do that again.
Down and then out. and up.
Okay, so down and then out, that's how they did it, okay? Or in all different directions. So when we run out of words to describe something, we dance. Okay, so it's hard to describe this plot. How did they get out? But suddenly everybody's going like this. Because your hands, now what's this? What's this? That's a bird. That's my hand. However, because of the magic of storytelling, this gesture now has become, not up here, but behind your eyes, a bird. I don't go to the supermarket and say, nobody would know what that means. But in the context of this little story, you know what this means. It suddenly has, what does this mean?
The sword.
Right. So sometimes the body, now in this case, watch this. The birds flew out from under it to freedom. Who's talking?
The narrator.
The narrator. Who's moving?
The birds.
The birds.
Oh.
Okay? So being the narrator, the characters, at the same time, I can be a character talking, or I can be a character moving, and I could be either the character speaking or the narrator speaking. So he crept around the corner. Who's talking?
Narrator.
Who's moving?
Narrator.
Right. So that's the fun of this, because I'm picturing it. So the body is part of the storytelling in support of the images. And you can bifurcate yourself so that you're both the narrator and a character, or you can be, he crept around the corner and said, you, over there, come and talk to... Who's talking right now?
The other person.
Who's moving right now? A character. So it can be, so your choice artistically, how you want to enact it, becomes, you have a lot of palette possibilities here. Okay, that's the first half of the story. Okay, if you were to retell that story, there's a very important part that's missing, if I wanted to make it longer. And that is, what happened under the net?
Right. How did they get to the top?
Yeah, what happened under the net to make them make that decision?
Oh.
Right? I didn't tell you that. All at once, covered all of that. 5 years later, in storytelling, it's very, you can cover a lot of territory with a short phrase. All at once, the birds began to flap their wings. What was the important word?
Together.
Together. Up the net rose. Okay. If this was going to be elaborated, and you were able to go down under the net and listen to the conversation of the birds to add more detail, something might have happened under there that caused them to come up with this plan. Now you know, compositionally, that ultimately they have to decide to work together. But how many of you have ever been to a meeting? Raise your hand. At a meeting. Okay, at the meeting, there is a problem to solve. Okay, so you walk in and you all sit down at the meeting, and the moment the meeting starts, do you have the solution?
No.
No. There are different personalities that are operating in any situation like this. That's why these old folk tales, sometimes are an excellent opportunity to talk metaphorically about what happens to people without anybody getting insulted. All right, so there's usually in any group, a creative group, you've always got the ideators, the ones that come up with the ideas. And then there are always the developers, the ones who take the idea and say, well, that's a great idea, but if we did this, it would really be much more practical. They develop the idea and make it workable. And then there are always the ones who can actually implement it, right? They really know how to do it. And then there are those that sit around and they're the critics. They're the ones that evaluate the whole thing. In the art form, of any art, you're all four things. I'm the one that comes up with the ideas, I'm the one that develops the ideas, I'm the one that puts it into shape, and I reflect upon it, and I fix it. In a team, there's usually somebody who's a really great idea maker who doesn't know how to make anything happen. But so that team needs to have somebody who's an implementer, right? And what happens when you have all these kind of personalities together where people have a better ability to evaluate, but they never come up with any good ideas, you get these fights that go on. Well, you know, you're a fine one to evaluate this. When's the last time you had a good idea? Well, you know, it's just like you end up. So what has to happen in a group is that everybody has to become stronger at being all four things, and then you have peace. Or you appreciate that Jane is the one who's always coming up with good ideas. It's a good thing we have Nancy, because Nancy always makes those ideas workable, and it's a good thing we have Samantha, because Samantha knows how to make them happen, and it's really George's job to make sure that we have considered and evaluated the way that we're doing this so that it's efficient and it works for the club. Okay? That's kind of, okay. So there's a meeting of the birds. It usually starts in an everyday meeting, not as nice and neat as the one I just described. Okay? What usually happens is there's a woe is me, right? So you need a woe is me character. And then you need somebody to introduce a solution or another solution, and then you need somebody to encourage everybody to, what are they going to do? Fly together. So you know where it's going to go. So give me some lines. This is what would happen if you were in a movie. Everybody would come together as a group and you'd write the script. Okay, we know what the scene is. We need some lines for these little birds. There's a cartoon happening here, all right? Or a little movie. It's an animation. So the first bird, the net falls down on the birds. They've been pecking it. By the way, what color are the birds?
White.
Blue?
Brown.
Brown.
White.
Brown.
Yellow.
Yellow. Okay, is there any right or wrong answer to this question?
No.
Please, in humility, when you're telling stories, realize just like people are listening with their imagination, they're listening for information, imagination, their memory, and emotion, they're also listening for information and making it however they want to picture it. So if you want them to be yellow birds, guess what? You have to say it, that they're yellow birds. If you don't say it, people are going to make it into whatever they want. So consider that everything you say, people are going, this is painting pictures with words. Okay, so what would one thing that might, the woe is me character is one logical place to start. So some little bird's going to say, the net came down over the birds, and one of the birds said, we're doomed. We're doomed! Can you all try that? We're doomed! Another bird piped up,
I'm scared.
I'm scared. That's right. I'm scared. What else?
We're gonna be dinner.
We're going to be dinner. That's right. We're going to be dinner. When suddenly one of the birds turned to the others and said,
Don't panic.
don't panic.
We can fix this.
We can fix this.
Let's work together.
Let's work together. But what will we do? I have an idea, and all at once. Now you don't even have to say what the idea is. Then the narrator could say, all at once the birds began to flap their wings together. Up, 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 the net rose. But that little scene, I didn't say that. So if you wanted to take the story and make it longer, you can look for little places to kind of stretch it out with, and they become opportunities to reflect upon life. The life of a group is, implied by a positive decision in that group of people. You want to change the world, you have to show people how change can happen. Okay, they went from disaster to solution. We went from sandy to rebuilding. There's a process. How do you look at stories? People work together. Nobody, with a single finger you cannot lift a pebble, is an old proverb. Proverbs are the wisdom tales without plot. It takes two fingers to lift a pebble. It's like you have to work together in this world. So if the message that you want to make is very important for people in the world to work together, here are 10 reasons why. And the 59% of all the people who have worked together have successfully completed their, and And it says, research has shown. Okay?
Right.
But if a child hears a story that is a physicalization, a mechanical thing that they can imagine physically doing, this is a concrete metaphor, but it's in the form of a narrative. So let's just, if you were to rename this story, what could you call it? Cooperation, or a flock of birds. I call it a flock of birds. But it could be named after the characters, the place. What would be a place name for it?
Under the tree.
Under the tree. A title that suggests the metaphor would be cooperation, or working together, or
Out from under.
out from under.
That's good.
Out from under. So making a point about that can be done a lot of ways. So this is a little neat little plotlet. It's 3,000 years old. It's one of the tales, a Jataka tale. In India, there are stories. It is interesting, when one culture lays on top of another over time, then very often the conquering culture defeats the spiritual beliefs of the conquered, or incorporates them into one kind of religious perspective or spirituality, and the two merge and go forward. So, for example, when the Hindu tradition, which is much older than the Buddhist tradition, found itself kind of in conflict in Jakarta, in Yogyakarta is a place I went in Indonesia. I went to Borobudur. It's a stupa, and you walk up this stupa all the way to the top, and all along the sides of the walls, I went with a little translator who was very well versed in both Hindu and Buddhist story matter. Along the side wall closest to the center is the story of Buddha's life. And on the other side are the Jataka tales, one of which is the wise quail, this particular story. And I was told, well, this isn't, the Hindus were told by the Buddhists who came, oh, you could believe in the story of Buddha because Buddha is part of your story tradition. How is it part of our story tradition? Oh, that wise quail who's under the net, that was really the Buddha in his pre-incarnate form. So he was part of all of your stories. Oh, this one about the wise parrot who entreated the gods to put out the forest fire. When the gods didn't do it, went and took and put one drop of water at a time and tried to save all. That wasn't a parrot, that was the Buddha in his pre-incarnate time. And so as I'm walking along, I'm looking at all these Jataka tales that I know. I'm looking at the story of Buddha and seeing how did the Buddhists incorporate the Hindu stories so that now those stories are kind of one. So this story that I'm telling, that we're working with, is a Jataka tale from Hindu tradition that is often told as a Buddhist tale. Okay, so it's interesting. All right, so in this story, it's a flock of birds, and we don't have one leader in there. The tradition is, in wisdom tales, there's a wise quail. We've made it just a group of birds. But you're working with material. This is plot material that's really old stuff. Obviously, it must have been useful, or it wouldn't be passed on and saved. Okay? So, what I'd like you to do is, with your partner, we're going to play a quick little game called Chain Story. So turn to your partner.
That word that you're saying,
Jataka. 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 I have a whole bunch of, a couple of Jataka tales in the Wisdom Tales book. Shameless marketing is on the table, but it's a good book. This has got 50 stories in it that, it's taken half of my life to assemble, but they're all good teaching tales. And if you're not interested in those stories, they're portal tales to different traditions that use story to make a point. So there are Zen stories, there are Taoist stories, there are Native American stories, Christian, Jewish, Hindu, all different kinds of cultures, all with the commonality that they share wisdom tales, that they are stories that make a point through narrative. Okay, so this is a game we're going to play. You and your partner decide who's number one and who's number two by the time I count to three. Go. 1, 2, 3. Okay, it's decided. If you're number one, raise your hand. If you're number two, raise your hand. If you didn't raise your hand, raise your hand. And this game is fair because everybody goes first. If you're number one, you talk first. If you're number two, you listen first. The listener has the challenge. If you ever want to play this with kids, the hardest thing in this world to teach people to do is to listen. It's the greatest step towards peace, is to be able to listen, because it means you're open to the ideas of others. Being a good listener is a high art. So, the person who's the listener does have the challenge, because when I say go, I'd like storyteller number one to begin to tell the tale of the flock of birds to your good listening partner. And your listening partner is going to be listening so carefully that when I say freeze, even if storyteller number one is in the middle of a sentence, stop. And storyteller number two will be listening so carefully that storyteller two will now finish storyteller number one's sentence and say the next part of the story until I say freeze. And then storyteller number one will finish storyteller number two sentence until the next. And you improvise the language of this story, because if you know a plot, you can do a lot. You can tell this plot again in your own words, but what I'd like you to do in this duet, as though you were one teller, is add the scene under the net and make it really clear who's talking. So if you have a narrator, make sure that one of the birds turned to the other and said, comma, quotation mark, and then say the line so that it's clear who's talking. Just make that little editorial clarity. Okay, so we're going to tell this very simple little plot and add a scene under the net. All right, can I have your attention? This is a form of development of storytelling skill called appreciative inquiry, where you inquire from the other person, what did I do that worked? Because it's hard to do a don't. When teachers say, well, don't do this, and don't do that, and don't do that. What do you do? Then what do you do? I mean, here I am, I'm doing a don't. I'm paralyzed because I'm not doing. But not doing is not a proactive forward motion. So all critique of storytelling, as I believe in life, with children or anyone, better to tell what was working. Appreciative inquiry, asking, can offer me some appreciation for what you think was really working, because that's the platform from which I can grow. Don't do that when you're in performance is a mind distraction, because the whole time that you're doing it, there's this little voice like, don't do this, and you don't want that voice over there. You only want the voice that's saying, I really liked the way the character seemed so real. And then the characters are suddenly blossoming and you're embodying them, and your whole body, you don't even realize it, but you're a bird. You can see bird, you can feel bird, you've flown over the ocean, you're a bird. It's real. And therefore you have what we call verisimilitude. It seems real to the person. They're in your world, created by words.
It seems like with don't things too, it's the only thing you can think of to do. So it's almost like a negative prophecy, like don't leave the keys in the car, and somehow the keys get left in the car. Like if you had never mentioned that, it never would have happened.
Right. If you said to the person, keep your keys with you at all times, or make a special place in your purse where your keys are always kept, that's your rule.
Right.
Okay? Then you can do that. Right. Don't lose your keys. Yeah. It's like, and so, I learned that as a young mom. My children never fared very well when I told them what not to do.
Right, I give them something.
But if I gave them something to do,
Yeah.
then they could successfully do that. So anything that you could say as a don't, you could probably find a way to say as a do. When you're coaching young people to learn to tell stories, or coaching yourself, or asking for guidance, ask for appreciation, because that's the basis from which you're going to build. Now this is the first half, by the way, of the story in Wisdom Tales, which has a second half. Because compositionally, you can learn from the wise as well as the foolish. And here's a good example of a kind of teaching tale like that, because now the second part of the plot unfolds. And you actually, Jennifer, started to go there. You said, you ended it. You found a good way to kind of find closure to it. She said, and so the hunter walked away wondering, where would he have his dinner? Or where would he obtain, where would he get his dinner? That's the way they want to present it. And so that night he went to sleep hungry. The next day, that hunter came back to the very same tree. And there were those birds, the whole flock of them, pecking seeds. He took his net and threw the net over the whole flock, and once again, together the birds flapped their wings, they brought the net up, and it came down on the tree. And they flew out from under it to freedom. The hunter had to climb up and drag his net from the top of the tree, now a second time. But every day, the hunter returned, and every day, for days, he took his net and he threw the net over the birds. And every day, the birds flapped their wings together and put that net on the top of the tree. And every day, he had to climb up and drag the net down. And why did he do this? Because he thought to himself, one day, they will bicker. And one day, it came to pass that when the net was thrown over the flock, one of the birds under the net accidentally stepped on another bird's tail. And the bird said, "Stop pushing!" And another bird said, "Now, this is no time for bickering. We have an emergency here." Another bird said, "Who made you the king?" As the birds bickered and quarreled and fought, the hunter arrived and they all were caught. He scooped up the net and declared, "I'm the winner!" Together they're strong. Divided they're
That's great.
Wonderful story, 3,000-year-old tale that starts with the results of cooperation, because you can learn from the wise, and ends in disaster, because you can also learn from the foolish. So they're two completely separate parts of this tale of trouble resolved, and sometimes trouble resolved. Okay, so do they let us go because they started late? We have till 4.
We shared a bit too.
Okay, so now I'm going to give you each a chance to tell a whole story. So I would like you to listen to two little tiny storylets. And I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, to really concentrate on your listening and see if you can take in this information so that you watch the movie. Now you could read this or you could listen to it, but if you watch the movie, you'll have a tale to tell. Okay? I'm going to tell you two little teeny tiny tales. First one. This is also 3,000 years old, but you have to keep your eyes closed so you're really watching. Okay. There was once a talkative turtle. He loved to talk. He would swim around the pond, talking to the bubbles and talking to the fish and talking to the reeds and talk. All day long he loved to talk. He talked so much nobody would listen anymore. He's just like talk. And one day, I don't know how this could possibly happen, but he did overhear two hunters talking. And they said, "Oh, this is a wonderful pond for turtles. Tomorrow we'll come and scoop a turtle out of this pond and cook it for supper." Oh no, thought the little turtle. Hunters are coming tomorrow? Oh no, what will I do? And he swam around telling this sad tale to everybody in the whole pond. He told it to the bubbles, and he told it to the reeds, and he told it to the grasses, and he told it to the water, and he told it to anything that would listen. Finally, close your eyes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Finally, he saw two white birds, and those two white birds were standing at the edge of the pond. He swam over to those two white birds and he said, "Birds, a terrible problem. Oh, and you can help me. If you just get a great big stick and you bite on each end of the stick, I can reach up with my little strong mouth and I can bite in the middle of the stick and you can fly up and I'll hold onto that stick with my strong mouth and you can fly me to another pond where I'll be safe because the hunters are coming tomorrow. And the two white birds said to the little talkative turtle, "It won't work." "Why not?" "Because you'd have to keep your mouth closed." "I know how to keep my mouth closed. When it's time to keep my mouth closed, I know when it's important to keep my mouth closed. I can keep my mouth closed on that stick and you can fly up. Watch. Look, did you see that? I kept my mouth closed. I was really quiet for just... Did you see that? I kept my mouth closed again. This will work." Well, two birds took the stick, they bit each end, and the little turtle bit into the middle, and up they went, and as they were flying up into the air over the village, a little girl looked up and gathered a big crowd. There was a strange sight. There were two white birds and a stick between their beaks and a little turtle dangling down. She said, "Hey, birds! Smart birds! You figured out a way to carry turtles!" The turtle couldn't bear it. He said, "It was my idea!" And he fell tumbling down to the earth. This story is true. Look at turtles' backs. To this day, they're covered with cracks. Yes. Could you picture that?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. There's one important part of this. Try it together. It was my idea. Okay. That is a verbal gesture that makes your voice do what your hands would do. Okay? So your voice can make a gesture too. It's kind of fun. Okay, nice little Swiss movie. And the important thing about that is you have to make a character who talks fast, right? Okay, second story. Ready? Close your eyes. This is from China. Same vintage, a couple thousand years ago. Two hunters went hunting for a wild goose. One of them saw a wild goose and said, "Oh, there's our prey. Oh, that goose will be wonderful roasted." No, said the other. "Far better to stew it." No, you don't know anything about cooking. "That goose would be much better roasted." "No, stewed. No, roasted. No, stewed. No, roasted. No, stewed. No, roasted. Roasted, stewed. Roasted, stewed. Roasted, stewed." They argued and argued and argued. Finally, one said, "Let's go to our clan leader and ask the clan leader's advice." And they went to the clan leader, and the clan leader heard the story and said, "Well, to be fair, when you catch the wild goose, perhaps half of it could be roasted and half of it could be stewed." The two hunters were pleased with the wisdom of their clan leader, and they went back to capture the wild goose. But by that time, it was long gone. Okay, open your eyes. See how fast you can say, "Stewed, roasted, stewed, roasted, stewed." Now try that. Stewed, roasted, stewed, roasted, stewed, roasted. Now see if you can make two different voices for stewed and roasted. Stewed, roasted, stewed, roasted, stewed, roasted. Okay, now you've got two characters and you don't even need a narrator between. Okay? Storyteller number one, turn to your partner. And storyteller number one, you're going to do maybe a 1.5 minute version of the talkative turtle. That was storyteller number one, right? Storyteller number two is going to do wild goose. Here we go. Are you ready?
At the same time?
No. Talkative first, and then wild goose second. Go ahead. Give it a try. Can I have your attention? This storytelling is a very large topic. The point being here, just to bring it home, is that stories are excellent containers for information. They're metaphors. They represent ideas. And if an idea is embodied inside of a story, it's easier to remember than a disconnected fact because of the way we process narrative. And because telling a story is stored in our spatial memory, these stories can be repeated because you heard it, you made a movie of it, and you remembered it enough to tell it because it sits there with all the other movies that you've seen, right? So it's as though it was a movie, and that makes it easier to improvise it. So in a nutshell, if you use your imagination and good listening skills, you can learn stories quickly by just hearing them. If you read a story, close your eyes and watch the movie and store it in the place where all of the other stories of your life live. And then improvise and try to tell it. Because the stories are fun. They don't have to be perfect. They just have to be vivid. And watch the eyes of your listener. If your listener seems engaged, they probably are. Okay? I'm going to offer you, just before you go, because we have a group of people ready to come in. This little handout, which if you could come up and take it. This has way more than we've been able to cover, but it's a collection of thoughts. Yeah, they're a collection of thoughts, and there are a bunch of little short stories in there that you can read and practice. There are a whole bunch of them. And because there is a website, www.storyarts.org, there are 72 one-page stories on that website for retelling that are 1 page long, that are just like a talking turtle, a flock of birds. Just like if you look in the back there, these are all stories about point of view. There's also an interesting list of questions to ask to get family stories. Because and some activities to do after listening to a story. Look, if you take a look at the family story questions, if you can get somebody to remember a place, and then you get them to remember who was in that place, plot emerges. That's how situation comedies are written. They create Cheers, a bar, fill it up with colorful characters, and then a new story happens every week. Well, if you get an elder to remember their first apartment and all their neighbors, they're going to tell you stories. If you say to an elder, can you tell me a story? They'll say nothing ever happens to me. Okay, so you have to help them locate imaginal space, which is what we have been working in. And once that happens, stories will come. The other thing I'd like to give you, I got the rights back to a recording I made in 1990 when I was very young and very, she. But they gave me 500 of these because they're my best stories. It's called The Eye of the Beholder. It's a collection of stories about the relativity of perception, the comedy and pathos of point of view. These are stories for adults. They're part of a one-woman show that I did years ago. And it took 5 years to make this recording because all of the stories question the relativity of perception. The truth and beauty in life is how you look at it. And the questions that are raised by all the other stories are answered by the last story that I came. It took 5 years to come to that story. So this is a long project. But anyway, everybody's welcome to have one of these. And they're good for long car rides. The first story on the CD is my version of Beauty and the Beast.
Okay.
And it's a 30-minute long story. So if you're going to listen to it, because it's got a twist at the end, you have to listen to the whole thing. So wait till you have 30 minutes.